Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you, Peter, for the invitation. How wonderful to see Pauline. Ladies and gentlemen, I was invited to come to talk to you about this book, Give Us Back Our Country. It's written by me and my young colleague, Jai Martinkovitz, but perhaps you'll know someone else more than that. The foreword is by Alan Jones. So you can see it's the sort of thing that would pass the pub test. The pub test is something that, ladies and gentlemen, what concerns us, and I'm sure concerns you, that this is just not the country that I remember. We're having an election now, and I remember when I was a little boy and we were listening to election speeches, and they were real speeches, and real people would come and hear opening speeches. And I particularly remember those opening speeches by Sir Robert Menzies. And he'd come in and speak to people, and they'd be interjecting and carrying on. And I remember on one occasion, some lady kept screaming at him, "Menzies, you're double-faced, you're just double-faced, Menzies." Eventually Menzies said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the lady says I'm double-faced. Well, I may be double-faced, but the lady herself is obviously not double-faced, else she would not have worn that face tonight." This, of course, brought the house down, and that was the sort of real live politics of that time. But something has happened. Something has happened in Australia, and I'm going to ask my friends over there to put on a short video. It may come on. If it doesn't come on, we'll continue.
Australia is one of the world's oldest continuing democracies, yet our institutions of representative democracy have been compromised.
They've been compromised by the power brokers, the faceless men in the major political parties.
Many of our politicians today seem to be lacking the basic common sense, good judgment and decency of the average Australian.
The agenda they're applying with the inner city elites would just not pass the pub test.
Yeah, obviously everyone's got their vote and they have their little bit of a say, but in the end of the day, the politicians do what they want, not really what we want.
I'm basically held accountable in my position. However, the politicians are not held accountable between elections. So they might come out and say one thing at the start of their campaign, and then as they become elected, they do the completely opposite.
Yeah, they're not thinking in the people, they think of themselves in the pocket.
I don't think much of them, to be honest.
I think they just say what people really want them to hear.
It's unfair.
Yeah, when the politicians say something, I don't always believe it.
I think they do no justice to our vote. We vote for them, we honour.
It's not very fair on the people that make the promises to, I guess.
I don't know how you'd change it to make it any better, but I'm sure there's a better way.
They should be kicked out.
Increasingly, Australians are demanding that our politicians be truly accountable, not just every 3 or 4 years in blank cheque elections.
Truly accountable, as nurses, doctors and journalists are accountable on every day of every week, of every month and of every year, just as you are. We're serious. We probably now have the most incompetent, corrupt and wasteful government in the history of our Commonwealth. In New South Wales, we have massive corruption, which has been revealed, corruption to the tune of $100 million by a minister who's manipulated the system in that state. What we warn in this is this may well happen again. We may get the situation once again of similar governments. They get in and we can't get rid of them. And the point is that in our political system, the two major parties act like a duopoly, just like Coles and Woolworths. They're run by power brokers. They do things which would not be acceptable in any comparable democracy. We have a number of chapters about the problem. For example, defenceless, a mosque-driven foreign policy and crime-ridden, schools in decline, they are still stealing your property. There's no doubt that property rights in this country are being undermined by the politicians. The case of Peter Spencer was a peak case in that regard, but it's happening all over the country. We have a chapter, Why Do They Hate Our Farmers?, subjecting us to a foreign agenda, and we go over a number of other aspects. We say that whenever the politicians realise that the people have woken up, they offer false solutions. One great solution in my state and yours, I think, was, oh well, if we could be in government for a longer period, if you give us a longer period, you'll get better government. If you give us 4 years, with 4 years in New South Wales, we've had the worst governments we've ever had in the history of our state. There are a number of other false solutions that I won't go into. We have a second part, which are the principles. And we decided to put the principles in because they're not being taught in the schools. The curriculum has been taken over, and what is our great heritage has been removed from the curriculum. And what we teach is that golden thread that goes back through Federation, back to the settlement, back through the Glorious Revolution, back to the Magna Carta. We need to teach our children, we need to teach newcomers to this country about this. And we finally come to the solution. The solution, interestingly, was found in this state before Federation. Charles Kingston, the great premier of this state, went to the Federation conventions. He came with a proposal which would have in many ways empowered the people more than they are. He proposed that a certain minimum number of electors in Australia should be empowered, once legislation has passed through both houses, to petition for a referendum on that legislation. Imagine what would have happened had we had that with the CO2 tax, the carbon dioxide tax. There should be a power in the people to do this. What we're saying is there is a solution. It's been found in Switzerland. It's been found in a number of states of the United States. We say that firstly, there should be a right vested in the people to recall any member of Parliament to a vote by petition. A certain number of people should be able to petition for a vote. Again, there should be a power vested in the people to petition for the repeal of legislation. If legislation is passed and the people don't like it, why shouldn't you be entitled, if you wish, to call for a vote on that legislation so that you can decide instead of a few politicians deciding on your behalf? And finally, if there is need for a law, you see the politicians not introducing a law in that regard. If you see that need, why shouldn't you be able to petition for such a law? For example, we have seen in this country a serious decline in law and order. The criminal justice system has slowly been moved away from protecting the people, protecting the victims of crime, and handing that power, handing that protection over to the criminals. In New South Wales, we've seen that the ICAC Commission has recommended that prosecutions be considered in relation to massive corruption in the state. It's likely, it's quite possible, those people may never be prosecuted because the DPP will say, oh, we can't prosecute them because we can't get the evidence before the jury. A lot of the criminal law has been changed through the law of evidence to keep the jury in the dark, instead of letting the juries decide the facts. And an enormous amount of work in a criminal trial and on appeal is about whether the jury should have seen such and such evidence. In a sensible system, juries are adult people. They're just as good as lawyers and judges. They should be able to decide themselves what weight to put on evidence. And also, we suggest that that wonderful institution which existed in Britain, we had it briefly in Australia, and it's been really a centerpiece in the United States, that is the grand jury, which is really a body of citizens who decide what they will investigate and whether there should be a prosecution. And that could have been established in relation to Craig Thompson. It could have been established in relation to the BER scandal, where about $5 billion was lost by the government. And it could have been established in relation to the pink bats in people's roofs to examine what breaches of the law had occurred. And citizens sitting on a grand jury could have decided whether a prosecution take place. We should also, in relation to the political parties, require them to live by minimum standards of democracy and transparency. At the present time, pre-selections are fixed. Somebody from the Senate, Senator Thistlethwaite was moved from the Senate. He'd been a former failed secretary of the New South Wales Labor Party. They've moved him to the House, but he's probably going to lose the seat. They've done that to create a vacancy in the Senate. Why did they need a vacancy in the Senate? They've decided that the 29-year-old Iranian-born secretary of the New South Wales Labor Party, who after he left university went to work for Labor spin doctors, then went to work for the Labor Party. In other words, he's never had a real job in his life. At the age of 29, he's to be put into the Senate to represent the people of New South Wales. This is done all the time in relation to pre-selections. Political parties should be forced to do what was done 100 years ago in the United States. Instead of a clique of power brokers deciding who should be your representative from the Labor Party or parts of the Liberal Party, not all parts, but parts of the Liberal Party. Instead of that, what should happen as happens in the United States 100 years ago. It should be supporters of the party, registered supporters of the Labor Party, registered supporters of the Liberal Party should decide who their representative, who their candidate should be in the election. There should be a massive reform of the political parties in return for the legal privileges, the exemptions they get from various onerous laws, the money they get, the special privileges they get, for example, their names on the ballot paper, the right to file their preferences in relation to the Senate. We need massive reform in this country so that the people can be empowered. The only way that we will cure this malaise, this evil, which has insinuated itself into this country, is by empowering you, the people. And the only way to do that is by enormous pressure on the politicians. I invite you, there's an organisation, cando.org.au. I invite you to go to that website and register your names. It costs you nothing, but let's have your names there so that we can begin a major movement, so that when and I assume it will be, the Abbott government is established, that he takes advice to do what we're proposing. And what we're proposing, and I'll finish on this, what we're proposing is this. We're not saying rush into this, although it works superbly in Switzerland, a country without any resources, which is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, one of the most democratic countries in the world. What we're saying is this. What we should do is what we did in the 19th century, the late 19th century, to achieve federation. Because had we not done this, had it not been done at Corowa in 1893, had this not been done, we could well have ended up 6 independent countries. Because what was happening was that the Constitution was being developed. They worked it out in a convention. Then they sent it back to the colonial parliaments, the state parliaments, where they all disagreed with one another and never agreed on what should happen. What was proposed at Corowa in 1893 was that the future convention be elected directly by the people. But more importantly, when they settled a constitution, it be sent to the parliaments for comment, but then, once they finalised it, be put straight to the people. The people should vote on it. This was quite remarkable because in an age when there were no faxes, no telephones, no jet planes, no modern methods of communication. In 7 years from Corowa, they got a constitution to the people. There were 2 referendums because it had to be changed. It was approved by the people. They got it to London, got it through the British Parliament in 7 years. Imagine how long it would take today. And that was the Corowa plan. It was proposed by a man called Sir John Quick, whose name should be known to every child in every school, but of course it's not known. But that is the pattern which we're proposing. We're calling on the next Prime Minister to establish a convention elected by the people to develop a series of referendums to empower the people, to reduce the power of the politicians, to make the politicians accountable, not every 3 or 4 years in confected blank check elections. You put them in and you give them a blank check and they do what they want to do. They should be accountable on every day of every week, of every month, of every year, just as you are. Everybody in every job is accountable like that. Why shouldn't the politicians be equally accountable? So we've written this book, but more, and you can get it later if you wish to. The important thing is to go to that site, cando.org.au, to start a movement in this country to empower the people, to chip away. It'll keep our stable Westminster system, but take away, return some of the powers to the people. After all, this is the 21st century. This is the 21st century. The political parties have become more powerful. They're run by power brokers. They're divided by factions. The factions aren't divided on principle. They're divided about 2 things. They're divided about power and they're divided about money. And the same thing is happening in both parties. To an extent, the Liberal Party is improving. But in the Labour Party, because of their ties to the union, they've developed another sickness, and that is that in relation to the unions are now rarely run by people who rise up through the ranks. The unions are run by people who are conscripted, enlisted. They come from the universities, they get a job in a trade union. They know nothing about the trade union. It's the Craig Thompson model. They get their law degree or whatever it is, they go into the trade union and they're interested in 2 things. They're interested in power and they're interested in money. They get into Parliament. Once they can get their superannuation, they get out of Parliament. They then take a lobbyist position or a company director's position on a CSG miner who terrorises farmers, takes away farmers' lands. We have this pattern emerging in this country. It's something we should have put a stop to. The only way we can put a stop to this is by our pressure on the media and on the politicians to force them to empower the people. Thank you.